Welcome back to the I Am More Than podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Wessel. I'm a former Miss Arizona USA, professional model, and founder of More Than Inc. This week's episode is incredibly informative, eye-opening, and truly inspiring. Our guest is a former beauty queen, Sports Illustrated swimsuit model, and sought-after speaker. She caught national attention when she went public with her decision to get a preventative double mastectomy at age 26. She's a breast cancer advocate and the founder of the nonprofit Previvor. In this episode, we talk all about choosing health over vanity, the loss of her mom, life after her mastectomy, and undergoing IVF. She's an open book and has a truly remarkable story. I'm honored to introduce you to my friend, Allyn Rose. Welcome to the I Am More Than podcast, Allyn. I am so honored to have you here.
It's so great to be here, coming to you live from Germany. So just a couple hours ahead.
Just a few.
Just a few, but thanks to technology, we're making it happen across an ocean.
Right? Are you living there full time now?
I am. So It's kind of funny. People see my social media and everything's very US based still, because that's where most of my work is. But yeah, I live here most of the time in Germany. My husband's German and packed my bags up about a year and a half into dating and moved here and haven't looked back.
Girl, that's a story that we're definitely going to need to dive into because I need all the dirty details of that.
It's too bad that I'm pregnant right now and can't have a cocktail. It's one of those great, like with a couple glasses of wine, primo story.
Right. Okay. So we need to dive into it once you deliver, and then we can have as much wine as we want.
Absolutely. We're going to do podcast round 2.
Deal. I love it. Well, I was first introduced to you through Sports Illustrated Swim. And I remember seeing you on the runway and you made headlines all over the place as the first model to have a double mastectomy. And then once I started doing research on you and seeing what your background is, I was in awe of you. And I've been so inspired by you ever since, following you on social media, seeing the Previvor. So for our audience that doesn't know your story, how can you just give us a quick little roundup of how you got to where you are right now?
I always feel like it's kind of tough doing your little elevator pitch and putting your whole life into just a couple seconds, but I will do my best here.
Take your time.
I got started in pageantry. So I competed at Miss USA in 2011. And then a year later, I competed at Miss America. So I had this really kind of unique experience to get to do both systems. And it really opened my eyes to really how women in positions like that have a voice to speak to their generation. And that was something incredibly important for me because the reason I had entered my very first pageant was I lost my mom to breast cancer at a really young age. And I knew my mom would have loved for me to do something like enter a girly pageant. When I was younger, I played guitar in a punk rock band. I was that really kind of offbeat girl. Never in a million years would you imagine that I would do a pageant. And so
love it.
I entered this one that raised money for breast cancer awareness, and I ended up winning and, get a little cocky at that point. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go for the big show and try Miss USA system. And, really through that experience, I was able to share my mom's story. And then it kind of pivoted from my mom's story to my story because as a Miss America contestant, I went public with the decision to have a preventative double mastectomy. And whenever I throw that out, some people kind of give you the head to the side. What is that? But for somebody like me who has a really strong family history, my mom, my grandmother, my great aunt, pretty much every woman in my family had lost their lives to breast cancer. And if you're in this position, or maybe you carry a gene mutation, you can have a preventative surgery where you basically go in and have a mastectomy without having cancer. They remove all your breast tissue and then reconstruct your breast if you choose. And so I did that at 26. And it was a very, very difficult decision to make. I think particularly working in the modeling industry and the pageant industry, so much of your identity is tied up in the way that you look. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. As young women, particularly in our 20s, that's a central focus for a lot of us. And it's just the reality. And so I think that's what really made my story sort of go viral was there's this young 20-something former model, beauty queen, et cetera, who was willing to essentially remove the part of their body that made them, a sex symbol or sexy person or what have you. But for me, watching my mom battle breast cancer and losing all those women in my family, I knew that it was the right decision for me. And so I had my surgery. I kind of gave up on the modeling world. I said, all right, it's done for me. I've had this surgery. I've chosen, life over this vanity sort of thing. And then that's what got me introduced to Sports Illustrated. I was sitting at home. I just lost my job. I had worked this really crappy job here in Germany. And I was basically just coffee fetching for someone. I, finished my master's degree. I'm like, and all I am doing is fetching coffee for somebody. And I came home, I had this boohoo moment, I've had this mastectomy, I've moved to a foreign country, my life is never going to be the same. And I saw Haley Khalil, who's also a former pageant girl who won the whole shebang, this Sports Illustrated swim search. And I said, you know what? I'm going to enter this year. I'm going to stop making excuses for myself, stop making excuses for why I can't be part of this world anymore. And just uploaded this 60-second video to Instagram, and the rest is history. And it's just been a wild ride ever since.
Girl, your story gives me goosebumps on so many different levels. And there's so much that you just said that I really want to dive into.
Sorry, that was a lot of word vomit.
No, I love it. And I think that's why, when I got to know more of your story, I would hear little snippets and then I'd go look at more and more and more. And there's so much depth to who you are as a person, which is just so beautiful in my opinion. But I love a specific TED Talk that you did, and you just mentioned it, where you chose your health over vanity. And I'm actually a former pageant girl as well. I competed at Miss USA in 2014 and was good friends with Haley Khalil. So I'm like, we got her, right? And when you do use your body really as your career, if you're in pageantry and you're modeling, that's a tough decision to then at a young age say, hey, I'm going to kind of take a step back real quick and focus on my health over everything else. And I'm sure that your personal experience with this made that very important to you. What was happening in your life when you're in your early 20s when you were like, now is the time that I need to do this?
So it's really hard to kind of pinpoint a moment where I said, now is the time. It was sort of, I'd been putting it off and putting it off. It was a conversation that I had with my dad when I turned 18. He sat me down and he brought up the idea of having this mastectomy. And as I said before, I was a punk rock chick, late bloomer. I'd just gotten my breasts, and really kind of coming into my own and my femininity. And the last thing I wanted to do was have surgery to remove them. And I looked at my dad and said, you're crazy. Why would I do that? And he looked me right in the face and he said, because you're going to end up dead, just like your mom. And it took, I think, him being that forceful for me to realize the reality of the situation was really every woman had died of breast cancer. And I couldn't be cavalier about it. I had to really have long-term perspective. And it wasn't just that my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. She had a stage 3 breast cancer at 27 years old. I was just a few years out from that. And so it felt like this sort of ticking time bomb on my chest. And so, I decided to do it. I'd gone public. I had this, amazing moment to really talk about it. And then it got down to brass tacks, when do I do it? Yeah. And, I wasn't married at the time, I didn't have any children. I had all these things going through my head, like, well, what if I want to breastfeed and I can't breastfeed afterwards? What guy is ever going to look at my body and think that I'm sexy again? All these sort of
real emotions.
Yeah, they are real emotions, but they seem kind of silly, looking back, but that's your life and it's how you feel. And these are real questions that women have to consider when undergoing a procedure like this. And I was dating somebody at the time who's now my wonderful husband. And he basically just said, you're doing this for me. You're doing this for your future children. You're doing this for your family. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you look like. I want you to be around for the next 50, 60 years and let's do it together. And so
it's a good man.
It's a good man. And him taking care of me through that whole process is what made me realize that he was the one for me. And I even wrote it in our wedding vows. just being able to kind of surrender yourself to another person to care for you in a moment like that is, I think, not very easy, particularly for an independent woman who's used to caring for themselves. And, once I made the decision, it was sort of easy moving forward. I just said, okay, one foot in front of the other, take one day at a time. And now I'm almost 6 years out from my surgery, and it's kind of crazy. I sometimes forget that I even had the surgery, looking in the mirror in the morning, and it's a really freeing feeling.
Oh, I'm sure. And you had mentioned that your mom was diagnosed for the first time at 27. And I think that there's this myth, whether it is a myth or not, that you don't even need to start worrying about a potential breast cancer until 40s. That's when you start your mammograms and all of that. Is this typical that you can get it in your early 20s? What have you learned now being in this field that women need to know?
It's exactly right what you just said. It's this common misconception that breast cancer is an old woman's disease.
Yeah.
And the more I work in this industry and meet other people, I realize just how young you can be diagnosed with breast cancer. And I'm constantly meeting women in their early 20s who have not a stage 1, 2, or 3, but a stage 4 metastatic incurable breast cancer. And they might have found a lump, and they went to their doctor, and the doctor said, "Ugh, you're too young to have breast cancer. Come back and see me in a couple of years." And that was the same thing that happened to my mom. She found a lump in her breast. She went to the doctor. She said, "Look, I'm a marathon runner. I'm very attuned to my body. Something's not right." And he said, "You're too young to have breast cancer. Come back and see us in 6 months." So she kept pushing and finally got that mammogram after she probably didn't even have insurance coverage for it, had to pay out of pocket. And they found this golf ball sized tumor in her breast. And so, it's a common misconception that it happens to older women exclusively, but it is something that they generally tell you, start checking at age 40 or 10 years prior to a family member's diagnosis. So obviously when my mom was diagnosed at 27, you don't really start checking at 17, but that's a good time to start doing a mammogram. But maybe if you had a mom being diagnosed in her 30s or in her 40s, you want to start checking, doing those mammograms, doing those screenings 10 years prior to that.
Wow. And I've heard you talk many times in Previvor that you had launched your company about just putting women back in the driver's seat of their healthcare. And hearing your mom's story, she basically had to force the doctor just to listen. We know when something's wrong with our bodies.
Right.
And I think that that's something that people get very fearful to step up and speak up, especially when you're around a professional, because you assume that they have your best interest in mind. And it sounds like that's not always the case. So if somebody is listening that feels like this is something I really want, what is some advice that you can give her when she's going into a doctor's office and actually demanding what she needs? Is it a mammogram? Is it a blood test? What is it that she should be looking for?
Yeah. So my best advice for somebody who has a doctor who's pushing back against their wishes is it's time to get a new doctor. But
Amen.
if you were in one of those unique situations, which some women are in, where you may only have one in-network physician, this is the only person your insurance covers, and so you got to work with this person, I would say it's always best to come armed with information. So that's why I started the Previvor, which is my nonprofit. And it's basically a digital women's health platform for people who are in my position, whether they have a breast cancer gene mutation or they think they might. So maybe mom was diagnosed, grandma was diagnosed, aunt was diagnosed, but you just don't know if any of them had been tested for the breast cancer gene or something similar. It's an easy blood test. You can get at your gynecologist's office or your general practitioner's office. And if they aren't offering that to you, it's something to kind of push back with. And so the Previvor was something that women could really take on their cell phone, walk into a doctor's office and say, "Hey, I want this. And here are the statistics. Here are the reasons why I should have this." And then should they choose to have a mastectomy or a reconstruction, they were able to come in and say, "Hey doc, there's not just one option for my reconstruction. There's actually 10, 20 options for my reconstruction. And I want this one. And if you aren't willing to give it to me, I'm going somewhere else." And I think when you're armed with that sort of information and you come in from a confident perspective, doctors are more likely to take you seriously, which is really sad to say that. A doctor should always take you seriously, but some practitioners are not as great as others.
Yep. So take me back to when you have made this decision that you want to get your double mastectomy. Was there information out there for you? Were there support groups out there for you, considering you're in your early 20s? What kind of resources did you have? Because I see now the Previvor. It seems like that was the blank space that was missing. Tell me about what you were experiencing and what you were seeing that wasn't available.
The scariest thing you can possibly do is Google the word mastectomy. And so when you're first going into something like this, I tell women, don't do it. You're just going to be hit with a myriad of horrible images and surgical complications and all kinds of problems. And that was another reason, exactly why you said that I created the Previvor, was there was no place for young women to go. So you had these support groups of 40, 50, 60-year-old women who could talk about what the repercussions were for a woman of that age, post children, in the middle of a marriage, those sort of things. But dealing with the real issues that a 20-something or even a 30-something might face when undergoing a procedure like this, there was nothing out there. So I joined a couple of these support groups. I found one or two women out there that were similar to me, but I mean, it wasn't that long ago, it was 6 years ago, but
Yeah.
it really felt like I was the only person on earth my age going through something like this. And then to have this big viral moment, I thought, okay, if people are paying this much attention, I definitely am the only weirdo out there at this age going through it. But now there are so many great resources for young women online. There's groups like the Breasties, which are an amazing support group for young people going through this. You can reach out, you can find different people who look like you, same size, same shape, same skin tone. All these sort of things really matter. And so I've been really trying to focus on different initiatives that are bringing those sort of people together in a mentorship program, because what looks right on my body might not look good on your body and vice versa. And so it's really important that we have a large group of women who are coming together to share their stories, to make people feel more comfortable with the procedure. Because the second I met somebody who was my age who did it, all that stress and anxiety is, taken off your chest. You can see somebody who's like already inside the light at the end of the tunnel, and you don't have to fear the unknown anymore.
Yeah, it's a relatability aspect. It sounds like that when you feel like you're not facing it alone. And I'm sure that viral moment for you was a mixture of emotions. I'm sure it was so cool, but at the same time, like, okay, well, what next? Like, who else do I talk to? How do I go forward with this? Who is going to be there when this moment is over? Yeah. So what was your support system like that? It sounds like your boyfriend, now husband, was wonderful through it. Your dad was fully supportive. How were you feeling when you made that transition, made the decision, and then post procedure? How were you really dealing with your own mental health throughout that process?
It was a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be. I'm a very bold person. I have no problem making big decisions and I always say putting my big girl pants on and just doing it. But having that viral moment, like you said, it was a lot of mixed emotions. You had so many supportive, wonderful people from all over the world, really sending me messages saying, hey, thank you so much for talking about this. Or, hey, you inspired me to go get that mammogram, or maybe I have this surgery too. But then, as you know, working in the pageant world, you have these nasty little people on the internet who like to say, she's using her mother's death to help her win beauty pageants. This isn't real. You're not actually going to go through with it. This is just a big farce to get press before Miss USA, Miss America. And so you start to beat yourself up in your own head. Am I being disingenuous here? Am I making this, very strong decision that's going to impact the rest of my life for the wrong reasons? And I was very lucky to have great family, great friends, and also people that I had just met on the internet be a good support for me that said, don't listen to the naysayers. For every one negative message, there's 1,000 positive messages. Focus on that. But once the surgery was all said and done, the dust had settled, people weren't constantly checking in on you and how you're doing. And for me, it was really tough. I had had my surgery in March, had my reconstruction in June, moved to Germany in July.
Wow.
Everything in my life was uprooted and different, and trying to navigate life with a new body in a foreign country, not speaking the same language, not having the same culture, all these different things really started to weigh on me. And it wasn't until I had that opportunity with Sports Illustrated that I realized how much I had allowed myself to hold me back, and
Wow.
I was my own worst enemy in this moment, because I said, okay, well, I can't model anymore. Nobody wants to look at somebody who's had this kind of surgery. I have all of these scars, all these sort of problems. You just make up and concoct these things in your head and your own limitations. And so it wasn't until I kind of like pushed myself off of the cliff, like made the big leap, that I realized, I'm the only one stopping me.
That's powerful. That's really powerful. And I think that we all have those mental blockages to a degree, that I think that a lot of the times we are the ones holding ourselves back from everything that we do want to accomplish in this life. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of hustle. It took you creating a video and putting yourself back into national attention. That's scary for anybody, especially somebody that's already struggling kind of with a new identity. And I think that if anybody's listening that can actually put themselves in your shoes, you took a huge step to protect your health, but it also kind of changes your identity, if I'm not mistaken, by how you view yourself. And I think that's one of the things that I found so powerful about your TED Talk, is you're redefining that. You're redefining what beauty is, but it sounds like you had to redefine it in your own mind as well. How did you do that?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Even if you don't realize, it's this subconscious little voice that's telling you you can't do things. And for me, I had a lot of excuses, quote unquote, for why I couldn't do things. And I had kind of compiled those all into one thing that felt like I was just pushing this boulder up a mountain and I was never going to get there. It was, I've had this surgery and I'm physically not strong enough. I can't exercise anymore. I don't look the same. I'm in this foreign country. I don't speak the language. I don't have my family support. I'm no longer Allyn Rose, the blank, blank, blank that I had established for myself in the US and in the area where I lived. And I just had to realize it's kind of this like, what have you done for me lately sort of thing with who you are. And my personal development didn't stop at 24 when I stopped competing in Miss America. And I had to realize that I needed to create an identity and keep evolving and becoming a bigger and better version of myself over time. And you can't just rest on your laurels of the things that you did accomplish or that viral moment that you used to have. And so once I got over that and over my own like boo-hoo, feel sorry for myself, it really felt like the sky was the limit. And I started realizing just how many opportunities there were out there and little things that I could pick up. And I was getting little messages from people and, asking questions here and there. And it just felt like my life blossomed again. And in this much more fulfilling way, because it stopped being about my story and started being about how I could help other women navigate this very difficult decision in their lives in an easier way. Because, I think sometimes as women, we like to hoard information, once we've worked really hard and we've got it, and this is our trade secret. We don't want to share it with anybody because why should they have an easier time getting to the top? And I never felt that way. And I always wanted to be able to help, but I didn't know how to do it. And so it was just literally like right over here on my couch, sitting with my beat up 10-year-old computer, teaching myself how to program a website and do graphic design and all these sort of things, and making this website, the Previvor, so that other women wouldn't have such a tough go at it, because I didn't want them to be like me, feeling sorry for myself, having a boo-hoo. They needed to be able to move on with their lives in a much quicker and more efficient way than I did.
Yeah, that's so well said. You took your pain into your purpose. And it sounds like once you made that decision, like, okay, I'm going to launch this so that I can help other women. I think it's really easy to turn that on and then you get really motivated. You want to keep going. And I'm sure there were times where you're like, okay, is it worth continuing to put myself out there? Is it worth continuing to have to listen to these random trolls that know nothing about what I've actually dealt with? Was it more gratifying once you start hearing women say, no, you helped me, you potentially saved my life? Is that kind of what keeps you going? Is that how you keep your own mental health in check as you move forward with your company?
Absolutely. And I think just that first one message, Mark Twain has this great quote where he says, I could live 2 months on a good compliment. And I think when you work in this sort of healthcare space, it's that times a million. The first time somebody said, hey, I saw you annoy me on Instagram all the time, asking me to do these self-breast exams. And she said, finally, I went in and got a mammogram. I've been putting it off for years. And she said, and I have breast cancer, but I have stage 1 breast cancer. And if I hadn't gone in and gotten that mammogram, it would have progressed. And you might have just saved my life from these silly little reminders on Instagram. And it was messages like this that made everything seem so ridiculous that I was worried about.
Yeah.
I'd have these women say, well, you're not representative of someone who's had a mastectomy because you had a positive cosmetic outcome. And it just clicked one day where I said, you know what, I am representative of a woman who's had the surgery because I have had this surgery.
Yeah.
And while I might not be representative for you, there's somebody else out there that needs to hear what I have to say. And by building a platform like this, I'm giving other women the opportunity to share their stories. So there's somebody else out there hearing their story and feeling like they're not alone. And then once that all started growing, all the negativity just subsided. And I feel like I am in a very good headspace right now and really kind of living my purpose.
I love that. I love that for you. And I know you were talking about the self-breast exams that you put on social media. I believe that it's also on your website as well. For somebody that doesn't know how to do a breast self-exam or they're very new to it, how often are you recommending that women start adapting that into their lifestyle?
I'd say the sooner the better. So you're never too young to get to know what's normal for your body. And that's really the easiest place to start. I realized when I started doing these reminders that I actually didn't know how to do a proper self-breast exam. I was out there telling people to do it, but I wasn't doing it consistently. I didn't know the proper method. And it seems so self-explanatory. It's a self-breast exam, but it's really not. And you do have to learn the tools to do a proper exam. So I said, all right, well, there's a lot of people out there telling women to do it, but nobody's showing them how to do it. So I just started doing these little quick and easy tutorials on Instagram, putting them on YouTube, TikTok, that sort of thing. And letting people know the very basic stuff. Like you should be doing it once a month. Week after your period, when we're on our period, you've got lumps and bumps and crevices and things you're going to worry about and freak out. Wait until that's all done. Your hormones are back to normal. That's when you should be doing that exam. And then it's just very basic stuff, putting your hands on your hips, putting your hands over your head, looking in the mirror, figuring out what's normal for you, or the size, shape, and color of your breasts, the way that they were before. If they aren't, if there's something that looks a little off, go see your doctor. And then it's just doing those simple fingering techniques that you can learn, Googling, watching little tutorials that I do. And once you know how to do it, it's with you for the rest of your life. It's like riding a bike. So once you know how to do it, you got it. You can do it in the shower, when you're laying in bed, when you're Netflixing and chilling. If you got a partner who wants to help out, that's great too. My husband always volunteers.
I'm sure he does.
I always say it's really simple. It takes less than 5 minutes, and it is your number one line of defense when it comes to, will you find your own breast cancer? And almost 50% of women find their own cancer. And so that statistic was crazy to me. And I said, all right, we have to teach women how to do this. And the fact that you don't learn it in a very basic, like health
class
in bed sort of thing in high school is crazy to me. So that's actually my next big dream step, is to get a nice grant where I can create a curriculum for maybe high school, college age girls to learn how to do it.
that would be incredible because that's vital
if anyone
information.
out there listening, please,
right?
we need your grant dollars.
Come on it. Hey, put it out there. You never know what's going to happen.
Testing here.
Exactly. And I also want to pivot because I know you're entering another really big chapter of your life. And you've been very transparent about your IVF journey. And you're very transparent about basically everything that you're going through, which I think is amazing. Vulnerability is power. But I've also heard you say that you don't necessarily want to be vulnerable all the time. You don't want to talk about the stuff you're struggling with. But you've been very transparent about this next chapter of your life. So first, I want to talk a little bit about IVF because I learned a lot just watching your videos. And also just how you're adapting to this change because it's a big change. So what made you and your husband want to go through IVF?
So I am a carrier of a very rare gene mutation. It's not a breast cancer gene mutation, but it's another X-linked chromosomal issue called Wiskott-Aldrich. This is something that I've known about since I was really little. I was gene tested when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And this had taken the lives of 3 of my uncles, numerous family members before me. And my mom, God bless her, had the foresight to, even in the last letter she wrote me at 16, years old, say, hey, when you have children someday, you might want to look into IVF with genetic testing because that's the only way that you're going to be able to eliminate this from your family tree and make sure that your children are healthy. So I had a 50% chance of passing this disease on to my sons who would be affected with the disease because it's X-linked, and 50% of the possibility of passing it on to my daughter who would be a carrier like me. So I just carry it. I'm not actually affected by the disease. So I sat down with my husband. I was very transparent with him. This is the situation. Here's how I would like to proceed, which is undergoing the IVF process. And like you said, I tend to be an open book online and I share all these things, but I also am the first person to admit that I hate to be vulnerable. And I don't think that I'm that vulnerable on the internet. I talk about all these things, but it's like, I take the emotions that I'm willing to talk about and I put them in this little box and, okay, we can talk about the mastectomy. We can talk about cancer. We can talk about losing my mom, but anything outside of that is kind of vulnerability off limits. But when you get into a process like IVF, where you're literally pumping your body full of these hormones, you're trying to create another human, you don't know if it's going to work out. I just had to throw that, control out of the picture and say, I really have zero control over this. All I can do is hope for the best, and go with the flow. And so I was very lucky. I was one of those people who got pregnant on my first try, doing IVF and having my transfer. And I'm about 22 weeks pregnant now. And it's been a very freeing experience, really having so many hormones pumping through my body and not being able to control how I feel all the time, because I just have to let myself have a good cry or talk about my emotions or just word vomit everywhere. And that's something that, I think you can totally understand working in the pageant industry and doing that. You want to always be this perfect package of, here I am world, my hair is done, my makeup is done. I have these perfectly curated sentences and here is my elevator pitch. And you can't do that during pregnancy. It will just kick you in the butt. And it has so far. But I'm just very, very grateful that I had the chance to share the experience, because I knew how scary it was going in it for me, the same way it was with my mastectomy. And I didn't want other women to have to go in blind and not know what to expect, because it's a difficult process, but it's not impossible. Yeah. And if you see somebody like you going through it, it just is a million times easier.
Definitely. How long have you been on your IVF journey? How long did it take for you to find out that you were pregnant?
I started IVF in late October of 2019. So it was right after I launched the Previvor at the beginning of the month. I had this huge media tour, did Good Morning America, all this stuff. So basically everything imaginable was happening. My brother got married. My best friend got married. I officiated weddings, everything was happening in October. And then I was like, let's just smack IVF onto the end of it. So I ended up doing 2 egg retrievals. So for people who maybe not familiar with IVF, they basically give you all these drugs. They stimulate your ovaries. You grow these eggs, and then they take them out and fertilize these eggs. And so I did that the first time. I had a crazy number of eggs. So my doctor said, "Oh, you are so fertile. You have so many eggs. You're kicking IVF's butt." But we had something like 34 eggs, and only one of them was healthy at the end of the day, when all was said and done, when they had been fertilized, when they had been tested genetically. So I was devastated, because it doesn't always work the first time. So I just basically had one shot. And then if I ever wanted to have 4 children, sorry, that's the luck of the draw. So I knew I had to do another round of egg retrieval. So I just said, you know what, I'm going to chill out for a little bit. Let's not do media tours and multiple weddings and travel all over the country. Let's just focus on one thing at a time here. And just tried to focus on my health and taking all the right supplements and doing all the things and avoiding environmental toxins, all the stuff that you're supposed to do. And I had much better results the second time. So we were able to get 3 more embryos from that round.
Wow.
So I then had 4 potential babies that are in a freezer at Shady Grove Fertility at that point. And so then it took a little while for me to actually be ready to put the baby in me. Yeah. So I had them already. I could have hopped in, and I just kept telling my husband, I'm not ready yet. And I don't know what it was, but it just wasn't at the point where I felt comfortable enough that I might be someone's mom. And my relationship with everything in my life was going to change. And so my husband is German, and he's very organized, and everything needs to have a timeline and color-coded 15-minute schedule for the rest of his life. And that is not me. So he said, okay, I'm going to give you some time, but there is a threshold here. So we've got a couple of months of wiggle room, think about our feelings, but we got to get down to brass tacks at some way when we're having a baby. So I gave him this deadline. I said, okay, July of 2020, we'll do it. And so everything got there. We're coming up to the deadline. I'm starting to have the panic, but it was nice to have somebody who's so straight and narrow and determined and confident in everything that he does. And so, well, of course, we're going to have a family and everything's going to be perfect and it's going to work out. And so let's just go do it. So hopped on a plane, went to DC, Shady Grove Fertility, had my transfer. And a couple of weeks later, I found out I was pregnant, and really the rest is history.
Wow. And what has the process been like, just watching your body change? Like you said, you have hormones that you hadn't had before. So as somebody that can really handle your emotions before then, and I think the idea of a woman being able to give life is the most unbelievable, mind-blowing, beautiful topic. But I also love that you have shown the other side, that it is scary, your body is changing, and you're not in control of your body. And I think that that's a process that a lot of women feel, yet they're scared to talk about because you're supposed to just be excited. So I really respect that you are kind of stepping outside of that and saying, I'm so excited. I wanted this. I worked for this, but I'm still allowed to have these emotions.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a once a year crier type of person.
Wow.
I bottle it all up. I have my big boohoo, and then that's it.
And then we wrap it up.
And every 15 minutes, there's something that sets me off. I don't know what I was doing the other day, like pouring a bowl of Cinnamon Toast Crunch or something, and just start looking at the packaging and tearing up. My husband's like, there is something wrong with you. So I just had to give up that idea of control in my life. And I just did a post about it, which I'm sure you've seen, where I talked about watching my body change.
Yeah.
And that was another thing where, I had a mastectomy. I've been in a bikini in front of 10 million people on television, all these sort of things that people would say, oh, this is so intimidating. This is so difficult. That was nothing compared to seeing your body change uncontrollably and knowing that it was going to continue to change. You got no say in it. You don't know how fast it goes, how slow it goes, what kind of emotions you're going to have. It's really difficult. And I didn't think that it would be such a challenge because, like you said, I wanted this. I planned for this. I literally scheduled the day that we put a baby in me. And it just didn't prepare me for the miracle of life, really, to get to that point where you have another living thing growing inside of you. You have this process where, women, we constantly have to change and adapt in our lives. And this is something I feel like I just had this epiphany the other day. We start out as young women, and then we mature, and then we get our period, and that's a whole thing going into adolescence. And then we get into our 20s and we develop into a totally different person. And then we come into our late 20s and our 30s and we start having children. And then we go through menopause. It's this nonstop barrage of our lives changing and throwing new things at us, and we have to adapt. And so I've just gotten to the point where I said, I don't have to like it. I don't have to like that my body is changing, that I'm getting bigger, that I don't fit into my clothes anymore. But I do have to accept it and appreciate this moment in my life. And like you said, it's hard to talk about those things, especially because it's such a sensitive thing. I have a lot of friends who struggle with infertility, a lot of friends who've had miscarriages, a lot of people who can't conceive, but maybe they can't afford IVF, or they have all these other sort of barriers to having children. And I do feel like I should just say, hey, I'm so lucky. I need to be grateful. Just shut up. But ignoring your own emotions and how you process things isn't helpful. And so I thought there's got to be somebody like me out there that feels these same crazy feelings. And even if not, at least I've said my piece and I can move on and move to the next chapter of this pregnancy and then ultimately being a mom. But
that's
it's
so
not easy.
Well
it
said.
certainly puts you through the ringer.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm not a mom. I hope to be a mom someday. But I'm sure. I mean, like you said so beautifully, women are constantly changing. I feel like once you kind of get a grasp on figuring out your identity and who you are in this chapter of your life, something changes. And I think that that's a beautiful thing, yet it's also beautiful to be human and one, be scared of it. And two, have mixed feelings about, you can be excited, but also scared and also frustrated and also indifferent, And I think that that's something that allows other women, even if they don't necessarily have either the platform or the confidence to say out loud, at least they know there's somebody else that feels the way that they're feeling. And that's the beauty of everything that you stand for in this chapter of your life, in Previvor, and everything that you've been through. So I respect the hell out of you.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. And you're so right. And it's very validating and comforting having women, slide my DMs and say, hey, I can never say this to my husband or to my family, but me too. I hated this. I didn't like being pregnant, or this was a challenge, or this was really scary. And having that kind of tribe of people around me really helped. And I think it's a really hard thing going through motherhood without a mother. And I think that's something that a lot of people will experience if they've lost a parent at a young age, because that's the first thing that people ask you. What was your mom's pregnancy like? What was it like for her? Can't you just ask her what her feelings were in the process? And it's kind of reopening that wound of, this is one more thing that I have to experience without her, and she doesn't get to experience with me. And that's a very sad thing. And then you think about childbirth and everything beyond. And so it's its own level of kind of processing and moving on to the next chapter of life. But I feel so grateful that I was able to do IVF, that my children will be mutation negative, that I've done everything I can within my power to make sure that they have a happy, healthy life. And I've done everything that I can to make sure that I'm there for them. And so that is a very special thing for me. And I don't like to pat myself on the back very often, but I'm very proud of myself that I made these life choices, that, my kids are not going to have to worry about the same things that I did.
Girl, if you don't want to pat yourself on the back, I'll pat you for you. Because I mean, you deserve it. And you're an outstanding person, especially being able to have the courage to talk about all of this. And I mean, you're not only just talking about very easy things to talk about in your life. Everything that you've gone public about is very personal. It's very difficult. and you've kind of taken control of everything that you can take control over and just kind of let what you can't control run its course. So I just thank you for coming on. Thank you for being vulnerable. I think you're going to help a lot of women. And if somebody wants to reach out to you, they want to reach out to Previvor, they want to just have a conversation with you, where do they find you?
So they can find me across all social at Allyn Rose. And Allyn's always a little hard, but it's Allyn. And then everywhere else at the Previvor. So if there's somebody out there who maybe has a strong family history, they just found out they had a gene mutation, or they just want to learn more information about how to do a self-breast exam, things like that, the previvor.org is a great place for them to access that information.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Such an honor to be on.
So there you have it. I hope you got just as much out of this episode as I did. Please take a second to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It helps us so much. And remember, you are more than whatever label's been placed upon you. We'll see you next week.